Welcome to Roots Ruminants, your podcast for creative and innovative use of farm, pasture, and rangeland. We're going back to the basics of raising and grazing livestock, growing your own forage, and practical land use.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of Roots and Ruminants podcast. I'm Justin Frichte, and I got Jared Knock along with me. And today we ventured out west, and we came out to the Daybreak Ranch, and we get the opportunity and privilege to sit down with Jim Faulstich today. And Jim's certainly been a pioneer in terms of somebody who loves the world of grasses and manages his rangeland. Not only great for the ecosystem and with a conservation approach in mind, but also to raise good cattle on and run a business from his cattle operation and has a striving good outlook on the business as well as conservation in mind. So with that brief introduction, Jim, we want to hear your story today. And so let's hear from where we're at today in terms of your operation, what you have going on, and then we'll probably take it back from how you got here and the beginnings of this as well. So,
well, thanks, Justin, and appreciate you guys coming out today. Welcome to Central South Dakota on a very untypical middle October day with water standing and green grass and nice and cool, and life is good, right?
Yeah.
I assumed that it was always this wet in Falk County.
Yeah, right.
Northern Hyde County is standing water in October normally, right?
No, and normally not green grass either. So, but typical of this year and our seasonalities of weather all the time anymore seems like we're dealing with extremes, and luckily we're having an extreme moisture event this fall to make up for the rest of the year.
Yep. Things look good. Grass is greened up. Okay, so as far as your operation goes right now, you have cattle, right?
Yes.
Cow-calf operation?
We and I'll get into it more, I'm sure, as we go along, but diversity is very important to us. So, yes, cow-calf operation is our main bread and butter, but even within our cattle operation, diversity is very important. So we run yearling steers on grass. We run yearling heifers that we breed for production purposes over and above our own herd replacements. We do some direct marketing of live animals for beef. So some diversity within that beef program. And then we also have 2 hunting enterprises for additional diversity. And you'll hear me talk a lot about diversity. That's really what's kept us moving forward, we feel, is the diversity.
It's awesome. That's been a common theme. Okay, so we're on, what are we up on? Is this episode 9?
I think it's 9.
Of our Roots and Ruminant podcast. The common theme amongst all the people that we've sat down and had this conversation with is diversity. So you're diverse now, but did you start that way?
Well, that's interesting. I was wanting to interrupt you and say it wasn't always that way. You know, I graduated from college in 1972, and it was all about specialization back then. And as you looked on the landscape, why people were getting rid of livestock in general, and for sure their diversity within the livestock. When I was growing up, everybody had chickens and a few hogs and some sheep and cattle and maybe a milk cow or two, and it was really preached through that time frame to specialize, and that's what most people were doing. And interestingly, as we learn from so many things, whether it's soil health or whatever, that some of the stuff that Grandpa and Grandma did were actually those sustainable practices to keep people in business on the landscape. So, yeah, that's where we started out, is strictly cow-calf. Was all about production. Okay. Pounds is all that mattered. So just to put it in perspective where we were and where we are, the first year I was on the ranch, we bought the ranch January 1 of 73, my wife Carol and I, and we were going to raise big calves. That's what it was all about. So we started calving right at the end of February, early March, and our first calf crop, I spent probably a week that never got to bed. My typical attire was insulated coveralls and chopper mittens to keep myself from freezing to death. Yeah. So you kind of can imagine what kind of environment calves were hitting the ground in, and I wasn't real smart, but I was smart enough to figure out there should be a better way than that, although it took a couple of years to get it really figured out. But now we calve mostly in May. We calve our heifers in April yet, but that's a small bunch, and we do have the facilities we can handle those in inclement weather. But most of our calves are born in May, and we're lots more profitable and a lot less stress and work, and obviously better for health and performance. And of course, you get back to those little surprises. There's always those, you just can't do those type moments, And interestingly, our calves are performing and doing just as well, and weaning nearly as heavy. We wean a little later, but weaning as heavy as they ever did. And we got more live ones to go along with it. So it's interesting how we change throughout life.
So you talked about going big right away. The genetics of your cattle then were mainly continental breeds, or not necessarily, or just larger frame cows? Or
of course, in the 70s, it was when the exotics, we'll call them, all moved in, and we got caught up in that, and soon learned that wasn't adding to our profitability either. And so pretty early on, earlier than some producers, we did tend to go back to the English side of things. And even though our cows on the average are too big yet now, we have tended to downsize our cow size some, and really have changed our priorities from I'll call them efficiency and convenience traits versus the pound traits. In other words, we've downsized our cow side. Have a son-in-law in the operation, and he's less tolerant of disposition than I am, and I'm too old to like it, and he just don't like it. So disposition's very important, mothering ability and fleshing ability, and we've really shifted our priorities within cattle, and our culling priorities have changed a lot as well.
So those convenience traits or efficiency traits, how do you correlate those to profitability?
Well, that's the other interesting thing. Again, when you're chasing pounds, you start shifting to lighter birth weights and maternal traits, and it seems like the other stuff still all comes with it from a performance standpoint. So it's so easy to get caught up in fads and chase certain traits, and it'll get you in trouble every time.
Yeah, there's definitely a line there that it seems we want to push the envelope for new things, but it's also important to remember some of the basic things, right? And those are probably some of those convenient traits that we're talking about here too. But.
Right.
My thought process was going the exact same way, Justin, when you said 1973 and kind of higher, looking for higher output and higher growth and that kind of thing. So I was going to ask the same kind of line of questioning. I was like, well, does that coincide with earlier calving and continental breeding, or was that two things that kind of happened about the same time to try and drive that? Now it's we've done some of the same things at home, and Justin and I have talked about both on this simultaneously, where if you really, really want to have an indoor calving place and you're going to really push things and you're going to calve in January, February, maybe the first of March with mature cows, push them hard, creep feed, go all in. There's a little premium there for that 900-pound calf first week of January. Other than that, it's like you're selling them by the head, right? You know what I mean? There's those few that'll kind of push through and get, make that middle of April finish mark or late April finish mark. And then after that, it's like we're all kind of just selling by the head, where I split our calves out, and the ones that weigh 100 pounds more than the others, calving in April, May, maybe bring $45 a head more for the extra 100 pounds. Sure. Everybody say, oh, that's $1.50 a pound times 100 pounds, $150. It's like there's a big slide there that closes fast. And yeah,
Plus,
if you're gonna do that.
you forgot to add in the extra expense there to get to that
Sure.
heavier calf and
Sure.
and the weather expense and
Yep. So it's either want to drive and have this really high input intense system to have that in this feeder calf market in eastern South Dakota we're talking about, or you just as well get way out of that zone, because we for years there we were that March calving, first March calving on cows, didn't have as many, had kind of calved indoors, and then when we started moving a little later and later, till we got to where we're like the first part of April. At that point, it was like that was the worst place to be. Like we were right in the middle of the worst storms. We were getting none of the premiums from that we would have if we would have calved in February, and had those huge big strapping calves that finished in April. So yeah, that's the bad place to be. If you're in that place, you should really think about going one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree. And I've made that comment in different presentations when it came to adaptability and calving times and those kind of things that, and we did do that. We moved up our calving dates back later gradually. But going from March to April, I describe that as jumping out of the frying pan and into the skillet, because and yet I caution people about changing too fast, too much too, because it's not only changing calving date, you're changing your marketing a whole bunch, you're changing utilization of your forage resources. Sure. You better have at least visited with the banker before you make a move like that, because it does change things. Number one, sell date perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I was going to mention before, we're talking about the economics of calving time and calving early and all that, but it was the economics of the ag economy that really forced us to reevaluate things, and that was going through the 80s and the ag crisis that was happening then. And we were forced to change. We were smart enough to figure out early enough that if we didn't change, we were going to be like a number of our neighbors that were being forced out of, for sure, the livestock business, maybe out of ag business completely, because of high interest rates and poor production. And so that's what really made us evaluate where we were and take a hard look. In fact, I hired a couple consultants at the time. One of them was a retired NRCS range specialist to look at our operation, because and we should have been able to figure it out, but again, we were chasing pounds yet at the time, and his evaluation soon pointed out that we were spending way too many of our resources, both time and money, putting feed up in the summertime and hauling it out in the wintertime. And he made a couple recommendations that led us to place our natural resources more of a priority and economics as more of a priority. And so he came up with the fact that we needed to spend more of the year grazing and putting up less feed, and so we shifted some of our hay ground to pasture at that time. And the other thing that he pointed out to us is our lack of warm seasons, grasses in our system. Again, both things that we knew, we just were ignoring, not recognizing, however you want to put it. And so we planted some of our marginal farm ground to warm season grasses, and all native, and that helped take some of the pressure off of our native pastures, and we were able to start shifting to more diverse. There, I bring that word up again. Mixture of forbs and grasses, and we were able to start increasing warm seasons in our native grasses as well. So those couple things were the starting point for us to take a big view of looking at things holistically. Changed our approach as far as recognizing wildlife as being an important for a couple reasons. Number one, it's a good monitoring approach, if you will, to what you're accomplishing on the landscape, which also led to some economic value to our operation and more diversity. But when we started taking a holistic view of what we were doing and placing our natural resources as our number one priority, all of a sudden, guess what? Profitability came right with it.
So tell me about those plantings. You talked about your existing native grasses kind of lost their warm season inclusion, moved over, I'm assuming, to cool season invasive grasses that would have been introduced to the area after the Dust Bowl. Combination of that and, prior, season-long grazing without enough rest time. Tell me about what that process looked like on the existing native grass, the introduced, or not, I shouldn't say the introduced, the native reseedings, and what do those pastures look like today after they've had, a couple decades of management the way you see fit?
Yeah, well, you always learn something, and things don't always go as they're supposed to or planned, and so the predominant species that we planted, again, so that we could take some of the pressure off our cool seasons. We were cool season poor. I mean, we were all about planting crested wheatgrass and brome as our hay crops or early spring pastures, etc. Even had some CRP that was a mixture of crested wheatgrass and alfalfa that at that time qualified. It wouldn't today, but at that time it did. At the very beginning of CRP, and we actually went in and killed that back out in a few years and planted it to warm seasons. And one of our, again, you got to kind of look at what's adaptable to your area. And through Millborn Seeds, we were able to get varieties that were adapted to our area. We specifically wanted big blue stem in there as a major component because it was obvious what little we had. It was just like candy to the cattle. Obviously, big production. So we went a lot with big blue stem, Indian grass, and side oats grama to kind of fit into our different soil site types to adapt. We would then go into some of the closed depressions with western wheatgrass, or in some cases even mixed a little western in. But again, then you're talking cool season, and we were all about warm season. Under today's standard, that's probably not diverse enough. We later on started putting forbs in with those plantings as well, added some additional species. But again, in the interest of helping correct our system, I'll call it, and to fill in a void of being so short of warm seasons, we went heavily warm seasons because one of the things we ran into is if you had a number of cool seasons in there with our drier conditions here in central South Dakota, the cool seasons would tend to use up the moisture, and the warm seasons would not get to express themselves or produce like we wanted them to. And so we were actually hurting ourselves if we had too many cool seasons in there. But certain sites won't grow those grasses, especially our closed depressions, and so we used western wheatgrass in those areas to help make sure we were at least having production in those type areas.
How are you managing those any different than now? I mean, people talk about, well, the native grasses, they're not going to be, or I can't abuse them as hard, which is probably true. But as far as like your turnout time and grazing schedule, allocation rates, stocking rates, how do those differ from your cool season?
Yeah, well, it's all about timing and rest, and that's the reason we didn't have warm season, the taller warm seasons anyhow. We had buffalo grass and blue grama and stuff in our native pastures, but not very much big blue stem. And so that's why, because the tendency in the past was to season-long graze, get out there early in the year and get whatever you could and stay as long as you had to, and then you started feeding, and it really disrupted our ecosystem as far as, in so many different ways. But so our timing, and we didn't eliminate, it'd been nice in theory to eliminate the invaders like brome grass and crested and bluegrass from moving into these, but we still see that happening. But what we've started doing is we'll go into like one of these warm season specialty pastures, I'll call it, early with our yearling steers. Remember I mentioned we we run yearling steers and heifers. Well, the reason we started doing that was to utilize some of our invaders and be able to be diverse and flexible with our grazing. I'll use the year 2020 was such a huge sweet clover flush, and without yearlings, that would have just all turned to sticks, and we wouldn't have utilized near the amount of it. And so whether it's the invaders, brome, or just regular cool season grasses, your production's in the spring. And so we want to have excessive numbers that we can reduce throughout the year, and that's where yearlings fit in good to be able to get out there. So on our warm seasons, we'll actually go through those early and put extreme, I'll call it, pressure on the invaders that are creeping in from the edges or wherever and however they're getting in there, get back out. We want to be out of those by the 1st of June, and that depends on your temperatures for the year. That may be too early, too late. So you got to watch your growth on those warm seasons, and when they start to get 4 inches taller, so we want to be out of there with livestock. And then wait, until past boot anyhow on the warm seasons before we go back in. And you have to treat those warm seasons a little tender if you want to keep them around. You can't chew them into the ground like you can cool seasons, or eventually they start leaving you, and that's why we didn't have any in the first place. So it changes. You need to be flexible. Those yearlings are key as far as being able to utilize. And the steers that we run are actually cattle that we don't own. They're cattle that we custom graze, and we have an agreement up front. In fact, in 2016, we didn't even go to grass with them. We have an agreement up front that with a 2-week notice, the cattle have to leave and go to a feedlot or other location or whatever the owner chooses to do. But we want that flexibility so we can take care of the resource. Again, that sweet clover year, we probably should add another 500 yearlings, but we didn't. And but it does, the yearling side of things really offers flexibility as far as using your forage correctly.
For sure.
Talk about what the average fall winter grazing program looks like for those cows and the replacement heifers that stay here. We looked at a lot of different things this morning that we're going to offer some flexibility that way: crop aftermath, cover crop grazing, stockpiled forage. What does the normal or the expected fall winter feeding program look like here?
Well, we're predominantly a grass operation, but again, we've felt that the flexibility of having a certain amount of farm ground is important. Years like this, it really shows its importance because there's been more than once where we had a dry spring and maybe froze about Mother's Day yet too, to where it really hurt the grass production for the year. And by having some crop ground, why maybe you can plant some Sudan grass, some bunker buster, a whole host of different things, cover crops in general, where you can make some fall grazing or some winter feed if you're going to be short. But we are predominantly a grass operation. We just soon not graze native grass in the wintertime. We do it, but it's not one of our goals is to do that. So we want to use the native grass as kind of a fill-in and go to full-season cover crops, aftermath cover crops, aftermath behind some of our crops. We raise a fair amount of corn, and so we have corn stalks to graze. But you always got to remember they can snow or ice under or not produce or whatever. So we also have 3 hay sheds that we keep full of higher quality hay for those winters when we have to feed. I thought this was going to be one of them, but things have really turned around, and that don't mean we won't get 4 foot of snow and still need the hay, but we see a real value in having that hay there, and one of our goals is to have it there but never use it. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be in a situation where we think we have to feed because we have it. we have that feed on hand as an insurance policy, and we want to protect it. That's why the hay shed, and it's really lent to our versatility and flexibility. But we want to graze aftermath and full season covers in the wintertime, and of course in the spring. The spring's when we get in the real trouble. We don't want to be on those crop fields when frost is going out. May still have snow on the ground. Maybe don't have as good a grazing as we need. So that's when we usually end up doing some supplemental feeding, is in the spring period, maybe even into calving. Well, I can use one example. Again, in 2016, we were actually feeding our yearling heifers in September and October in the interest of staying off of the native grass. And this year would be another good example of that. We have really good recharge of moisture and production of grass going into the fall. But I'm here to tell you, if we chew all that into the ground going into fall, it's going to really hurt our spring production.
Yeah.
So we were all braced to start feeding this fall until we had crop aftermath, and we aren't going to have to do that because we were blessed to have all this moisture we've been getting and warm enough weather that I've never seen our grass look this good in the fall. It's the best grass we've had all year, let alone in the fall. And I think, as we were talking earlier, I think it's because it was so dry all spring and summer, the grass really never went through its main growth period. And I saw green needle grass just heading out the other day, middle October, really. I think it's even in 2019, when we were actually wetter than we are this year, we didn't have the growth in the grass that we're having this year.
Yeah. Yeah, the grass never really got the opportunity to run its life course until we came into the fall now, it's just the way the year rolled out. You brought up a point with a hay shed that made me chuckle.
We were talking about hay storage on the way out here.
We did. Jared, as we move west, you see more hay out in the field. Jared goes, I really need a hay shed. And I was like, yeah, they can actually pencil for themselves pretty quick for the loss and spoilage of hay. And Jared says, actually, you should probably just have my hay instead of the shed, instead of the cows in the shed. Which there, too, is true. Which has more value being kept inside, the cows or the hay? Probably the hay, most times. Yep.
Not that I have a lot of cattle shoved inside, but I mean, this is the idea that it's probably, if you depict the two, having a big old indoor calving barn, to get that extra few pounds and things like that, or how much quality hay could you put in there? And what would be more important to that animal that's acclimated to be in a cold weather environment, a gestating cow, not a calving cow, a gestating cow. What would be better for her to have a little bit more access under a roof, or her to eat something significantly higher quality for feed?
Well, and especially on a year like this with all the moisture we've had going into the fall, there's going to be a lot of loss of feed. And then also the fact that if you don't need to feed it this year, you're going to compound that going into next year. So the fact that you got that covered for multiple years, I've got some hay in one shed that I think, I'm not even sure how old it is. It goes back 10, 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And, well, that probably suggests that I got more hay shed storage than I need. But on the other hand, what an insurance policy, to have that on hand. And boy, I was loving every minute of it being there all summer. We put up 0 bales first cutting of hay this year, and then we got a little wet spell the beginning of July, and actually put up we grazed our hay fields early. Not that there was much there, but it was something, and it turned out good because then we got that little wet spell, actually put up some hay about the 1st August, which was first cutting for us, even that late. So, but it looked all year like we weren't going to put up any hay.
Yeah, and what an insurance policy against the price of, we've over doubled the price of hay from one year to the next year.
Yeah, and I've told people different times I probably wouldn't build those hay sheds under today's conditions. Maybe not today's conditions, last year's conditions. Let's put it that way. when you look at the cost of building materials and the fact of what the building costs you to have with insurance, et cetera, I'm not sure I would do that again. I think there's other ways of doing it. But I think the important lesson is here, you better have a source, a backup, if you're trying to do a year-round grazing system. And instead of 3 hay sheds, maybe 1 would be a more appropriate thing. Mm-hmm. But at the time, I was actually selling hay to a dairy in Minnesota, and we were doing some irrigation and stuff, and I was getting enough premium out of that second and third cutting hay and storing it inside that I could justify the sheds, and now it's come in really handy ever since. But I don't know whether I'd build them today, but I do appreciate Jared's comments on the value of protecting that hay. Either you shouldn't have it or you should protect it. Mm-hmm. And I was at a seminar one time, and the guy really put it in perspective. He made the comment. He says, "Well, do you haul your grain that you harvest home and dump it in the middle of the yard?" Well, it's production off of a given acre, and you better spend some money and take care of it. But it's also the reason we've shifted to more acres of grazing, because we do feel that that's really the most economical way of taking care of the landscape.
Yeah, I think it's a mentality thing too. So if you know that your hay is only going to last 2 years outdoors before it really starts to get, pretty gross, you're just going to feed it, right? So you're not going to be as tempted if you know you have to have about that many bales on hand in case the winter's bad. That's how many you put up, and if it's going to rot if you don't use it, you're just going to use it, right? You're not incentivized to really get more creative.
You're 100% right. If you got it, you're gonna feed it, and that's a backward mentality. You're exactly right.
Yeah. Versus 200 bales in a storage system. Well, now we can be all the creative we want because we're not going to lose our equity in our hay by letting it rot. Mm-hmm. So, anyway.
So as we started talking in this podcast about diversity within your rangeland and your beef operation, you mentioned the hunting operation. Because you've focused on the rangeland and the production of the rangeland, you've probably seen an increase in wildlife, right?
That's correct. And again, one of those interesting aha moments that you really should be able to figure out, but it's not human nature, that when we made that decision with our consulting that we went to making our natural resources our number one priority, all of a sudden the wildlife started to flourish. And we've always had wildlife, although we got down to where it was really low in the 70s, again, because of our intense grazing and farming, and everything was intense. And it was just an interesting aha moment that the wildlife was actually increasing to the point we were having a lot of crop and tree damage and stuff between deer and pheasants digging crops up and stuff. And at the same time, my son-in-law and daughter joined the operation. Adam's a very important part of this operation, the next generation to run it, and his son, the next generation after that, the way it would appear. And so we had more manpower. We had additional land, and bought a neighboring place that had an additional house on it. And so things started pointing towards maybe we should capitalize some of the requests we had for upland bird hunting. And so we started that in 2000. And then after people were seeing some of the white-tailed deer that we had running around here, we had a number of requests for deer hunting as well. And so we started that as a second enterprise. And that was never part of our business plan. It was just because we got aligned and started operating in tune with nature and taking this holistic approach to things and managing the natural resources, that came along as a gift. And that's what I call it, as a gift. And it's built into a very important part of our economic total package and what our operation represents. And another neat aspect of that is the number of people we get that come here year after year, that we have an opportunity to relate to what's happening on the landscape with land management, economics, relating to food supply, and a host of different subjects that we get to visit about.
I think it really, that's the wildlife that we have really thrive off diverse land use in the same area that they can adjust to from different times of the year. So there's food and there's cover and there's shelter for the different needs throughout the year. They work well with mixed land use where we have waterways and grassed areas in the middle of crop fields right next to big stretches of rangeland and trees occasionally. And it's fun to see when all those things come together in the same landscape and what comes out of that.
Yep. So being in the hunting industry, I mean, now you're part of the entertainment business, right? And I think, I don't know why I've thought this more recently than I ever have, but even a lot of the things in agriculture that we do really relate back to the entertainment business. And I think we're seeing that more now, even with the food industry and how much food in general, eating out, dining is obviously entertainment, but even the eating experience itself is part of the entertainment industry now. So how has your family been able to adapt to entertaining people? You mentioned teaching them, right, through the things that you're doing and they're learning, and that's a great opportunity to share that. But as an agriculture industry, is this something that we need to continue to gravitate towards more, understanding that, just pleasure itself is going to be a viable industry in what we're doing now? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you're exactly right, Justin, and I'll relate to a couple different things that have happened, but first I'll make a couple comments in general, and that is there's a real hunger for people to want to get out of the daily rat race and get out in open spaces. And it can be for a host of different reasons, and I maintain that everybody has that opportunity if they want to capitalize on it. Whether it's a summer recreation thing, winter snow experience, ranch experience. It don't have to be hunting. There's a host of them out there, and it's unbelievable the interest and demand in that. We just had 4 archery hunters here, and 2 of them were a husband and wife from Montana. In the most beautiful part of Montana, places that we go to visit.
Yeah.
And they're in central South Dakota archery hunting. And they made the comment about how they enjoyed living in our little house, and they wanted to move in. And I says, well, if you have enough money, well, that can be arranged. And we all had a good laugh. But then the follow-up comment is what I think really carries weight that we need to take to heart. And the gentleman's comment was, he says, well, some people go to Paris and Acapulco. We like going to South Dakota. He says it's the only time I get a nap all year long. and so those out in the open, away from people, those outdoor experiences, and he was able to do it with his wife. Last year, she harvested the first deer archery she ever had. What a meaningful experience to her. Mm-hmm. And so things that we take for granted have a special, valuable meaning to a lot of people.
So true. Yep. I think just and we have seen that more. Obviously, hunting is an industry that's booming on its own. But even what you're saying, if you had an acreage and for some reason it's an abandoned house now, fixing that up and just giving that agritourism experience to people is another growing industry within itself too. So always opportunities and great other ways to diversify an operation through those two. So
it is still hard for me to get my head around the fact that for so much time there was mass, movement of people away from this part of the world, just unabated one way, decade after decade. And I've always loved it here. I've always loved Eastern South Dakota and couldn't quite understand it. It is nice to be recognized for it once in a while, but it is still hard to, and I know that things were very, very, very tough for about 4 decades, in there kind of from the mid 70s when 76 drought all the way through probably the late, till about 2010ish, maybe things, so there were some kind of bright spots, but it still is nice to see people recognize that this is a beautiful place to be. Sure. And once with all the pandemic lockdown stuff, people that were living in Los Angeles, when all the things that made a city fun are closed and there's no place to eat, there's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go, then you realize that you're just living in one giant CHAFO, confined human feeding operation. And why would you want to be there?
Is that a real term? A CHAFO?
It is now. CHAFO.
Right.
Confined human feeding. CHAFO.
Human. Yeah. Yep, it is.
Okay, CHAFO. Right. It is now.
Yep. People want what they don't have.
I'll be looking in the dictionary for that.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll get Courtney on that. Courtney, if you're listening.
So we talked about everything you have going on here, which is a lot, right? Yep. Let's talk about the things that you're involved in as far as groups, organizations. Obviously, you feel that it's important to be a part of and continue to, do good work through leading in those organizations. But can you just give us, kind of a reason why you want to be involved in those and the things that you are involved in? Well,
the good part, that might be debatable. The important part, you're spot on, and I think it's something that we in agriculture have tended to take too much for granted. It's really easy to complain about the government involvement and the policy we get crammed down our throat and stuff. But if we aren't doing a better job of being that voice for what's working, what's right, what's needed, what's good for the landscape, I guess we can't complain about what gets handed to us. And so I kind of accidentally got involved in all this stuff, probably partially because of the challenging times we went through in the 80s economically. Our switch to natural resources, it was really an aha moment for us. And it's changed our lifestyle. It's changed our operation. I'm a guy that if I got D in speech when I was in high school, I'd have taken that and signed a contract. and to go from there to giving comments in Washington, D.C. is kind of a switch, and not necessarily easy switch, but an important switch. And so one thing's led to another. I was asked to be on the board of directors for the South Dakota Grassland Coalition shortly after they started, and that was my initial involvement that just led from one thing to another. And I was thinking about that as you asked that question, and basically all of it is because our view, again, and you probably think I sound like a broken record, but from that holistic approach, that one of these organizations feeds off of the other, and so how do you say no to the next important part of it, if you will? It's kind of like saying, no, I don't want you to be my wife this week, but maybe next week. You don't just hop in. You don't get partially involved. It's life, and you're all involved. So I've had trouble saying no. I did say no yesterday to another opportunity because I'm just too busy and getting too old for this stuff. But so I started off with the Grassland Coalition. That led to getting invited to a national organization at that time called Partners for Conservation, which is now called Partnerscapes. We changed the name because of some infringement by a conflicting organization, and so we changed the name of it, and that's not an easy thing to do. But again, all these feed off, which led to a number of trips to Washington, D.C., sometimes to testify, sometimes just to build relationships, and it's really opened up a lot of opportunities over the years for me just because of people I've gotten to know. But so the Grassland Coalition was kind of the start, and I've been involved with helping get the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition up and going. We were approached as a Grassland Coalition to take on the soil health movement, and I was chairman at the time. My comment was, this is way bigger than what we can handle. This deserves a separate organization. So the coalition, Grassland Coalition, and several other organizations were instrumental in getting the Soil Health Coalition and going, and I think it's been obviously the importance of that organization. I was also involved in the startup of the South Dakota Agricultural Land Trust, which is soon to put out our first easement to help keep South Dakota agricultural land productive in agriculture. I was involved in being on the Ecosystem Services Consortium as a member of the Producer Circle. And there's been a number of organizations. I'm on the board of directors for Governor Noem's Second Century Habitat Fund, again, strictly from a wildlife standpoint, but if somebody from agriculture isn't involved in that way, you don't have that agricultural voice. And obviously we've talked enough about wildlife that it's important from a holistic standpoint. So, and there's been other organizations. I was on the Hyde County Weed Board for 35 years, and I'm sure there's organizations I'm forgetting here, and not by intent, but by default, I guess. Sure. And yet one feeds off of the other. And it's kind of the approach we've used with the South Dakota Grassland Coalition, keyword coalition, the importance of having everybody involved because everybody is involved.
A lot of great success stories in there. And you talked about, being instrumental in starting this South Dakota Soil Health Coalition that's turned into one of the best participated in, highest subscribing, active membership of any commodity organization in the state of South Dakota. Or I shouldn't say it's a commodity. I wouldn't call soil a commodity, but, of all the ag groups, they have a great, robust following I've seen.
Yes.
To meetings.
Yeah, they're a good group. They've done an excellent job.
Jared.
Yes.
One thing we haven't had this podcast is a deep story that relates to the topic that we've covered yet.
I don't know.
So what have you held back?
No, I was thinking about hay storage and CHAFOs. I guess that's the two things I've really been thinking about in my mind. It was really cool to see those cranes go by today earlier when we were looking at some new seedings that we were out in and saw a
the
group
sandhill
of
cranes fly over.
Well,
yeah,
you bet. And we're going to start our pheasant hunting season Saturday, and you wouldn't believe how much time we spend looking in the sky at the crane migration when we're pheasant hunting.
Oh, cool!
Yeah. And the migratory birds. You start getting a flock of snow geese going over with the sun reflecting off of them, and cranes and those are experiences that somebody from New York City or Utah or whatever don't necessarily get to see. So it's some of that outdoor experiences that we have.
It really is beautiful stuff.
Very neat.
Jim, anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't cover yet?
Oh, we could go on all day.
Go on. I know. Well,
we could have taped the first 4.5 hours of our conversation today.
That's true. Yeah.
3 hours. Yeah.
We had an awesome morning looking at fields and looking at grass and beautiful, beautiful place, and certainly very thankful for allowing us to come out and doing a little podcast with you today.
Well, thanks for coming. And I guess that experience out there looking at that new seeding and seeing a rooster pheasant get up just as you walk into it kind of reflects the whole story. We could have had a big 6-point buck get up at the same time, I guess.
Pretty awesome. All right. Well, that's it for another episode of Roots and Ruminants. Appreciate all the listeners listening in, and stay tuned for another episode coming in a few weeks. We'll see you.